We're back at Sync Summit, and we managed to catch up with Dan Gill, who's the general manager of Vagrant Records. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You know, one of the first things that you did when you joined Vagrant 10 years ago was you formed the sync department at the record company, and I'm curious, why was that such a priority for you at that time to form that?
Well, when I came to the company in 2002, I noticed, the bands that Vagrant previously had, they were, we were getting some sync requests, mainly in the skateboarding world, snowboarding, action sports world. Mm-hmm. And, the money was minimal, but it really got to me, got thinking when for my previous company, that didn't even exist, or, when I started in this business back in the 90s, it really wasn't a part of the label's services, I guess, to an artist. So being in LA, putting all this together, I'm like, you know what, we need to really address the sync side of the business. I didn't know much about it. We've had previous bands in my other labels, in movies, etc., but obviously in 2002 it was becoming a much bigger part of the business. And what we started doing is we started to put together a database. I started networking, meeting people, meeting our fellow publishers, and really just got more involved in networking and getting our repertoire out into that world. And as we started evolving as a label, signing the Eels. I think Eels was a real tipping point in terms of syncs, for artists. When we signed the Eels, and we were still, a majority of our artists were still in that punk rock world, mm-hmm. which isn't the most in vogue music for sync for the most part. That's when I really started to notice. I'm like, wow, these, getting, major network TV shows and seeing the money that was involved. And not only that, the exposure for our artists, because when we noticed when we would get these bigger syncs for a band like the Eels, we would see the uptick in sales. And that really struck a chord, with the, the entire label, sure. And management as well, upper level management, the owners of the company. Mm-hmm. And that's when we really started putting emphasis on that side of the business.
Okay. Now, as an independent label, I'm curious. I mean, you sign talent, just like the majors do.
Right.
But I'm curious, from your point creatively, as general manager, what level of development are you looking for talent to be at before you sign them? I mean, what are the expectations that you have of where a band will be before you get involved?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think Vagrant has a few different philosophies, when they sign artists. Obviously, we really want to believe in the artist and love the artist when we sign them and believe in the music and feel like it has huge potential. But, there are certain bands like Black Joe Lewis and Blitzen Trapper, when we signed the Hold Steady, those artists had sales bases. They were at a certain level, and we were really good at taking them from here to here. I think we've changed our philosophy a little bit. We're still looking at those bands, obviously, mm-hmm. but we're also in the ground level in terms of artist development, finding bands that are out there that obviously we love. It's nice to find bands that have a little something going on in the blogosphere, whether it's Hype Machine, they're selling some records independently on iTunes or mm-hmm. Amazon. That helps as well. I think it's a different case with every band. It comes down to, okay, here's the music, and okay, what else is going on with the band? Do they have a booking agent? Do they have management? It's great to have those other elements in place, a manager and a booking agent, because in this day and age, there are so many records released, so many bands out there. The heavy lifting involved in terms of developing an artist it's challenging. It's challenging. So the due diligence and really putting forth I think the effort in terms of is the music there, number one, and is this band viable? can we sell it? You know, and I think you have to balance both the business side and the belief in the music as far as signing to Vagrant.
Okay. Now, as an independent label, I'm curious, what are the main methods that you use to promote and market artists besides radio?
Well, first and foremost, it's blogs. It's online. It's the blogs. We've got a great team of online marketing people at our office. I'll put them up to anyone in the business, honestly. And you know, I think that's from an editorial standpoint, the pitching process, and the analytical standpoint, metrics, and finding out what blogs and what methods in terms of getting your artist out there and getting the artist exposure, all of that together, I think hopefully results in a formula of success in establishing that foundation with that band. And I really think that's where it stands. I think number two is the social media aspect of that. Social media is so important. When that band is out there and they're releasing a new piece of content, a brand new piece of music, the goal is to make that connection with that fan who's discovering that band and grabbing them and making them a fan, hopefully for life. And that connection, you know, not only just on the onset of releasing that song, but in the future, when you're releasing new songs, when you're releasing the album, all that factors into building that new media base when you release an album.
Okay.
So I would say really that's a very, very important, that's the front lines of our initial marketing phase on a record. And then look, I would say iTunes, our digital partners, Spotify, Rhapsody, all of those, you know, partners really look out for new and independent bands. They're there for discovery. Yes, iTunes sells millions and millions of records of mainstream pop artists, but the great thing about them is I think they really have a great hand in editorial. There's a great human curation element to trying to break and promote new independent artists from whatever genre it would be. And that's just not iTunes. There's other, you know, there's other partners out there. It's Amazon and Spotify and Rhapsody and eMusic. Everybody matters, you know. So I think that's an important part of it. And then you obviously have YouTube, which is going back to the online marketing portion. YouTube is huge. It's really the biggest streaming service in the world,
Right.
as far as music goes. So I think you have to have your ducks in a row and making sure that you've got a good plan of attack with all of your digital partners to release that music. And you hope that that all comes together and becomes successful. At the end of the day, the music has to stand on its own. What you can create is the opportunities out there and giving that artist the best possible chance to succeed.
Okay. How much of Vagrant's business is physical today versus digital?
It's, I would say it's between 60 and 65%
On
digital.
digital, okay.
Maybe
Interesting,
it's
okay.
more than that on some records.
More than that,
You know, we
okay.
still have some bands that do well physical, but
Mm-hmm.
I think if you look at the entire scope of the catalog, new releases, it's probably 65%.
Okay. Final question for you. You've been working in the independent sector for a long time. Where do you see the future opportunities of growth for the independent label sector in today's world moving forward?
Well, I think the independent labels have really positioned themselves well. I think that, you know, as far as the non-traditional outlets, blogs, I mean, there's so much at your disposal being an independent label to get your music out there. I think that allows you to be on a very highly competitive playing field. Obviously, our struggles as independent labels is still in that traditional, look, everybody wants radio. I think all bands want radio. It's difficult. You look at the radio charts and you see what records are being played out there, and it's dominated by major labels, which is not much different than it was 5, 6, 8 years ago. I will say, I think, especially alternative, is playing more independent music. They're playing more new music than ever. I was looking at the alternative playlist a couple of weeks ago, and I would say 75% of that music is new music, which I think is promising for independent labels and for breaking new bands. I would say that's a plus,
Okay.
for us. But you also have the other sector of radio, which is the non-commercial, the non-com stations like KCRW and KXP in Seattle, XPN in Philly. They are really influential. Those NPR affiliates are really influential radio stations that can really help launch a record. And those are the stations that are out there looking for new artists to break
Okay.
and looking for those niche artists to promote and expose. And then you have Sirius Radio, which has become a really, really important component for us as well. They're, a station like Alt Nation, Sirius Alt Nation, they're leading records now, and they're selling records. I think they're a real leader out there in terms of that broad exposure, or a band that really is bubbling under and ready to take that next step to a more mainstream audience.
Okay. Dan, thank you so much for doing this. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Okay, great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.